Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk with you about another game I want to introduce you to, and another world I want you to introduce to you. Today we're going to talk about Warhammer Age of Sigmar, its lore, and a very small overview about its gameplay. Warhammer Age of Sigmar is a tabletop wargame, where two or more players fight against each other with their armies, which each player assembled and painted beforehand. It is published by the company Games Workshop and is set in a high, dark fantasy setting, which spans 8 mortal realms and dozens of kingdoms, empires and dominions. Plenty of factions roam the mortal realms, and epic battles are being fought between the high Lumineth realm lords and the roving hordes of the Skaven, the Stormcast Eternals and the indomitable slaves to darkness, or between the other factions that fight for glory, power or just good old wealth. The lore, which I'm mostly going to focus on in this video, is rich and deep, but I'm going to give you a more or less quick overview and go deeper in later videos. So, where do we begin? First, let us cover what the Mortal Realms are and how they came to be. The Mortal Realms are enormous planes of existence. There are 8 great Mortal Realms and dozens of smaller demi-planes. But small is here maybe not the best word, as even these demi-planes can have at least one continent worth of landmass. But back to the Mortal Realms. The 8 realms are Akshi, the realm of fire, Gur, the realm of beasts, Gairan, the realm of life, Ulgu, the realm of shadows, and Shaiish, the realm of death, Haish, the realm of light, Shamon, the realm of metal, and Azure, the realm of heavens. The mortal realms are all composed of sometimes dozens of continents and seas, and are made up of the magic from one of the great winds of magic. For instance, Akshi is the realm of fire, or Shaman the realm of metal, and so on and so forth. But this doesn't mean that everything is just fire, metal, light, death, etc. in these realms. It just means that everything in these realms is related to that theme, or has components of it. For example, in the realm of fire, not everything is on fire, but volcanoes dot the landscapes or deserts stretch across the continents. But there are also verdant forests or even glaciers up in the mountains. These things just have some underlying theme that connects them with the realm they're in. Maybe the trees have red leaves and are resistant to fire, or the glaciers march ever onward, destroying townships that stand nearby, as fiery temper and aggressions are also traits of this realm. This is true for all mortal realms, and even their residents. For example, the inhabitants of Akshi have a fiery temper, or an adventurer from Gur might have a pragmatic and adaptable character, which is so typical for their home realm. All the realms were created when the world that was, the setting of the predecessor wargame, Warhammer Fantasy, was destroyed by the forces of chaos. After the realms were created by the unknowable forces that govern the cosmos, they got populated by mortal races. When the gods that survived the ending of the world arrived in the mortal realms, there already were civilizations that flourished. Soon, the forces of chaos discovered the mortal realms and sent their legions out to corrupt these untouched realms. The Age of Chaos began. Discord was sown between the gods, and so the somewhat united pantheon splintered. Even united, they would have struggled against the endless hordes of chaos, but alone they were no match. Many civilizations fell and were completely destroyed. Even the gods had to hide or endure the Age of Chaos on their own. Sigmar, the god of humanity, walled himself and anyone that was able to get to Azure in time off in the impregnable walls of the realm of heavens. But many didn't make it in time and were lost. Some found other means to survive, even though the realms were now darker and more dangerous than they were in the Age of Myth, like the Kaldron Overlords, a race of Duardin, built huge flying fortresses and fled into the sky. Some even thrived, like the Uruks of the Uruk war clans, We are not in the least as bothered by chaos, even welcoming the legions as they thirsted for battle. Thousands of years passed, until Sigmar threw the gates of Azir wide open, and the Age of Sigmar began. Out of the gates of Azir strode legions of Stormcast Eternals, the new warriors of the now self-proclaimed God King Sigmar, shoulder to shoulder with regiments of free guilds, throngs of the dispossessed, or armies of the Wanderers or the Darkling Covens. They would march out and cleanse whole regions of chaos influence, but still the majority of the realms, even to this day, are either still controlled by chaos or completely wild and untamed. This Age of Sigmar is where most of the story happens, but even then, plot lines can go back into the Age of Chaos, the Age of Myth, or even further. What also is to be said is that the Age of Sigmar already goes on for a few millennia, and so even the races that only recently came into the picture are hundreds, if not thousands of years old. This lets them all have an interesting character. But what are the races that populate the mortal realms? Well, at the point of time of me recording this video, there are 24 factions. But more are to join the picture every year, and so the lore gets more intricate and interesting every year. Before we speak about the factions, let me tell you, short and quick, about the Grand Alliances. There are, at this point in time, 4 great alliances, but there might be more in the future as the Grand Alliance of Order slowly crumbles under the influence of certain more snaky members. But more on that in the future. What are these alliances? Well, there are loose confederations and alliances, between the major factions that dwell in the Age of Sigmar. But these confederations are not really bound to help one another. Once there was a time when all the great alliances were striving for unity in their own ranks, but that intention has long since vanished. In the current day, the alliances structure themselves more like this. Grand Alliance of Order. Everyone who is against chaos, the undead, or the forces of destruction. There really hasn't been unity since the Great Realm God Wars at the beginning of the Age of Sigmar. Sigmar has tried and failed to unite the factions and gods, at least the ones who are still left. This Grand Alliance is the most likely to fracture, as some factions are only part of this Grand Alliance because they are not part of any other Grand Alliances. In the near future we could see a new Grand Alliance, based around some elven factions. As a side note, this video is being recorded after the campaign book Broken Realms 1 Morathi released, just for the context so you know. The next Grand Alliance is the Grand Alliance of Chaos. This one is fairly straightforward. Any faction that is a part of this Grand Alliance is a follower of Chaos and the Dark Gods. They are the arch enemy of the Grand Alliance of Order, but like their counterpart, they're not really united. Every faction does their own thing and doesn't really care about the other factions in the Grand Alliance. They are not likely to fracture, as their reason for being a Grand Alliance is that they are worshippers of chaos, and hate every other Grand Alliance with only a incy-wincy bit more passion than they hate each other. After that, we have the Grand Alliance of Death. This Grand Alliance is based around one god, the god of death and undeath, Nagash. He is somewhat of a good old enemy to the god King Sigmar. He went off after the beginning of the Age of Chaos and started his own thing, nearly exclusively reigning over the realm of death, Shayish. All factions that are a part of this Grand Alliance are directly or indirectly controlled by Nagash. A peculiar thing about this Grand Alliance is that they are more or less unified. Nagash keeps an iron grip on most factions in here, and so they are forced to keep good relations with one another. He is also the creator of most factions in this Grand Alliance. This Grand Alliance is not that likely to fracture, as there's only one faction that might have a problem with Nagash in here, the Soulblight Gravelords, but we don't have much information on them just yet, as their battle tome hasn't come out yet, and they are still only a part of the legions of Nagash. I hope this will change in the future, as I would like to play them on the tabletop. And then The last alliance is the Grand Alliance of Destruction. In this Grand Alliance, there are only those factions which worship the god Gorka Morka, or a deity spawned directly or indirectly by Gorka Morka. They are the Grand Alliance that is the least a real alliance. None of the major factions have any real pacts or agreements with each other, and the members of this Grand Alliance often clash against one another. Every other Grand Alliance hates them with varying degrees of passion. For instance, the Grand Alliance of Order despises them because Gorka Morka just went off and like Nagash did his own thing at the beginning of the Age of Chaos, and because they are bloodthirsty savages in their eyes. This assumption is more or less true, and the factions that make up the Grand Alliance are proud of it. Gorka Morka is the god of war, brutality, cunning and hunger. He's not the god of civilization or progress. This Grand Alliance is also very unlikely to fracture, as the factions within already fight amongst themselves. The faith in Gorka Morka or his spawns, and the fact that no other Grand Alliance is willing to have them, keeps them a Grand Alliance. And with that, let us move on to the factions. Every 6 months, there are major rule changes, and so the way that a certain army is playing right now on the table might change a bit when the points costs or some interactions are redone, but this won't change the theme of an army completely and will just affect the units that you might be taking or the playstyle that you want your army to have. A defensive army is always going to be defensive, but the units that are the best at being defensive in this faction might change, and instead of being a slow-moving wall that focuses on dispelling the spells of your enemies, you are now racing to the objectives and then form a wall while dealing extra damage against units that uses magic. But now that we got that out of the way, we will start with the Grand Alliance of Order. The Cities of Sigmar. This faction is focused on different city-states that were established when the Age of Sigmar began, or shortly thereafter. Your soldiers are more or less the everyday people that inhabit the mortal realms. The cities of Sigmar are like small isles of civilization spread across the mortal realms. Even though there are dozens of cities, all with their own cultures, customs and beliefs, most of the realms are still wild and ruled by the beasts of chaos or other hostile factions. This faction consists of more than one race, and you can find humans, elves and Duardin in here. This faction is a sandbox faction in-game, meaning you have a unit for nearly all occasions, and so you can build a Cities of Sigmar army, which is more melee focused, or ranged focused, or even magic focused if you want. The real trick here is just to choose the right units and against your army, against the army you're facing off against, and then play them like they want to be played. You can keep the army along racial lines if you want, but the Cities of Sigmar also promote using units from all races that make a patchwork army which is equipped to do exactly what you want it to do. Nothing more, nothing less. Teamwork is your theme. Daughters of Cain. Your army consists of blood-crazed murder elves that mostly stem from Ulgu, the realm of shadows, or live in the underground of the Cities of Sigmar, that dedicated their lives to the god of murder, or now better known as Morathi Cain. All your elves run around half naked, as armor is something for the unfaithful, and only the brides of Cain are allowed to really fight in his armies. This means that 99% of your army is female, a mixture of crazy Valkyrie-style murder elves, and so to say, spiritual harem of the god of murder. Since Morathi, the High Oracle of Cain, has more or less become the embodiment of Cain himself, she rules as a god queen over her faithful, and even her monstrous daughters have stepped into the limelight and don't hide anymore from the eyes of the other gods. You don't really have many overwhelming sorcerers or wizards in-game, but you have excellent priests with good prayers. Nearly every unit in your army is melee, so you want to sprint across the table while buffing yourself up with prayers and then shred through your enemies like a hot knife through butter. Fire Slayers. This army is made up by the half-naked Duardin worshippers of Grimnir. the Duardin god of vengeance, honor and war and such. Blazing runes of Urgold, a material created when their god was shattered after battling and slaying the god beast Vulcatrix, are hammered into the skin and thus make them semi-demigods that are extremely powerful on the battlefield. Because of the runes, they don't need armor, and they believe that when they have used up all the Urgold in the realms, that their god will fully come to life again. As a Duan faction, they are very interesting, as they will work for anyone who will pay them in Urgold. You have a solid priests with solid prayers in game, and you can tunnel strike your enemies with the right units. The Fireslayers are really the tankiest army in the game right now, but you have very few models on the table, meaning you constantly feel like you're playing the Spartans from 300, but with more fire and Duardin. You want to get to the objectives on the battlefield as fast as you can and then make your eternal last stand there while playing the music from 300. Then we have our next faction, the Idonet Deepkin. Don't worry, they have gloves on. The Idonet Deepkin were the first experiment of Teclis, the god of magic, to recreate the High Elves from the world that was. But it failed, and Teclis discarded them, nearly hunting them to extinction until they fled into the unknowable depths of the oceans of the mortal realms. A large part of their society is born without an intact soul, and so they have to steal souls from other races to buy themselves more time. They are sea elves that come to the surface to raid coastal towns and cities, to steal the souls of the residents to replenish themselves. They created a form of magical force field that is known as the Ether Sea, that allows them to breathe underwater like they were on land, and also walk and move like they were on land, while the creatures of the deep can act like they were underwater, while they're really on the surface. You have very good cavalry and insane movement, but as of yet your wizards are not that good and all of your troops on foot are a bit lackluster. That might change, so maybe in 6 months it will look different. You want to charge the enemy with as much units as you can and alpha strike everywhere. Next off are the Kaldron Overlords. These Duardin are an interesting bunch. In the Age of Chaos, when the roving hordes of beastmen or chaos warriors flooded the mortal realms, these Duardin saved themselves in their Karaks by lifting them into their skies. After millennia, they came down to trade again, when the gates of Azure were flung open and the Age of Sigmar began. Their society has changed massively since the dawn of the Age of Chaos. They value a mysterious metal called ether gold above all and have largely lost their faith in the ancestors or the Duardin gods. Only the mighty skyport of Barak Thrun still clings to their traditions. The other left this faith for a form of ultra-capitalism. In-game, you can spend ether gold to get cool one-time buffs and command a kill team style army where nearly every model has a different gun. You have no real wizards or priest, but your ether chemist can trap spells in a bottle, which is really cool. Strong ranged, but fairly weak in melee, in comparison to the other armies. Also, you have flying bolts that get from relatively small to fucking huge. Think of the Kaldron Overlords as an army made up of Counter-Strike kill teams that fly around the battlefield and drop some units on objectives to score points and then win the battle. Lumineth Realm Lords. Age of Sigmar's High Elves with an interesting twist and some dwarven influences. They live in the 10 paradises of Hayish, the Realm of Light. In the Age of Myth, the Lumineth Realm Lords were created by the brother gods Tyrion and Teclis. Ether Quartz, a substance only found in Hayish, the Realm of Light, can enhance their enormous magical and physical talents, but over time it makes them addicted to it. This racial-wide addiction and the fact that ether quartz enhances their already great egos brought them to their downfall. When Teclis needed to come to help them personally after the Age of Chaos, only a handful of enclaves were still standing. Teclis formed their society anew, and now they have their addiction more or less in control, and worship the spirits that inhabit their home realm, Ein Shayish. In-game, you can spend ether quartz reserves that give you very good one-time buffs for the price of a debuff afterwards. Nearly every unit in your army is a wizard, and you have the literal god of magic, Teclis, on your side. Some really good hammers and anvils and teamwork abilities. You can be very fast, and the Ellerith units give you some very unique units. Also, the new models that were revealed shortly before I made this video are pretty cool and unique. And besides that, they're my main army, besides Orgrimmar tribes, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, but you have to live with that. Seraphon. Dinosaur-riding dinosaurs following a plan made by long-gone gods that might be flawed and impossible to complete. The Seraphon survived the world that was by seeking refuge in the stars. The enormous temple cities these lizardmen called home were discovered to be ancient space vessels that the old ones, their enigmatic gods, left for them. They drifted for a long time through the great void until Dracothian, an enormous god beast, found them and brought them to the mortal realms. In the skies above Azure, they bid their time until they once more emerged from their temple cities to strike at the roving hordes of Chaos, their arch-enemy. In the game, they have two distinct fighting styles. Either you play as the Starborn with a magic-heavy playstyle and some teleportation, or you play as the Coalesced with a more melee-focused playstyle. As Coalesced, you have some really good melee units and play more like the Lizardmen from Warhammer Fantasy, where you take large units of Saurus warriors and some really nasty monsters to just drone your enemies with wounds and melee damage. The only bad thing about Seraphon is that they don't really have good ranged units, and their units have not always aged well. They really deserve a visual rework. Stormcast Eternals. Sigmar's eternal warriors that he uses to fight chaos. The Stormcast are warrior monks that have taken up in their giant storm keeps to safeguard important locations or guard a specific free city. Endlessly, they train in the art of war, and magic of Azure has made them more or less immortal, as when they die, they get resurrected in Azure. But every time this happens, they lose some of their personality in the process. Each Stormcast is a chosen warrior of the God King, as they were picked by Sigmar himself in the moment of death on the battlefield to fight in his eternal army. Sigmar has also divided them into separate chambers, and each chamber has different strengths and weaknesses. Some are good in melee combat with magic, while others specialize in cavalry tactics. On the table, half of your army can deep strike, so you're very good at positioning. Your shooting is great, and some of your melee units are not lackluster either. So you're well rounded in both as an army. But you're fairly slow and more elite than most, so most of the time you have a little number disadvantage. You have okay-ish wizards with good combat stats and great priests with great prayers. Not the easiest army for beginners to pick up, even though they are the flagship faction for the tabletop. Think of your army more like a team of specialists that teleport to important positions on the table and then do the thing they are best at doing. Sylvaneth. Alariel, the god of life, has sown the seeds for a new beginning. Her army of dryads, sprites and treemen has conquered large parts of the realm of life, back from the ever-hungry clutches of Nurgle, the chaos god of plague and pestilence. The Sylvaneth are a faction completely made up of forest spirits and tree creatures. They have taken up root in the realm of life and protected against the hordes of Nurgle. Elariel, the goddess of life, is one of the closest allies of the god king Sigmar, and some Sylvaneth are even best friends with some of the free cities. Each Sylvaneth is born into a glade and fights to protect it. Each glade is somewhat unique and has different ways of changing up the Sylvaneth in the lore and on the table. In game you have more or less the necessity to take Wildwoods, the Sylvaneth version of extra terrain, as your units get better when they are near it. The army is very slow and some of your units are really lackluster. Elariel is also not anywhere close in power level to the other gods playable in the game, but Kurnoth Hunters, in addition to Duranti, the Arch-Revenant, are really powerful and can tear down whole swaths of enemy units. Some other synergies are also good, but currently the Kurnoth Hunters are the only combo that can be competitive. But like with anything in Age of Sigmar, as long as you're not on a tournament or playing on a competitive level, you can play Sylvaneth as a decent melee army with some really fun mechanics. I just want you to know that the Sylvaneth got hit by some nerfs and are not really the best faction to pick up, as they are the underdog faction, and that's why I'm not recommending them for new players in general, as they can get really infuriating if you're not already good in the basics of the game. After the Grand Alliance of Order, we have the Grand Alliance of Chaos, a conglomerate of all factions that worship one or more of the Chaos gods. Beasts of Chaos. The Beasts of Chaos have been worshipping the gods of the warp before it was cool. They are the manifestation of the warping influences of chaos. All realms, except of course Azure, are largely infested by these animal-headed savages. They worship chaos in its many forms and even worship smaller chaos deities like Morgur. Everything that civilization represents they hate, and only the organization of the Horde is not completely despicable to them. The mightiest warlords rule their herds and follow the life teachings of chaos and their great fray. They are the natural enemies of order. In-game, they play like a horde faction, with some really good heavy units that you want to hide in the hordes of expendable units until you're close to the enemy, all the while sacrificing enemies to summon more Beasts of Chaos. When you played them in Warhammer Fantasy and want to join in Age of Sigmar, you're really in for a treat, as they got buffed and made into a viable faction. Even though you're still the underdog, it's not like in Warhammer Fantasy. You can still win tournaments or play them effectively. Underdog in Age of Sigmar is something very different to being the underdog in Warhammer Fantasy. Blades of Khorne. The fanatical followers of Khorne, the chaos god of slaughter. They fight in his everlasting legions, side by side with his demons. Hordes of them roam the wasteland and topple empires wherever they go. In the game, you are a faction completely focused on melee. Melee is everything, and you don't have magic. But your prayers and priests are really solid. You are a little more elite than most and must make the most of your units, but your fighters are awesome and even your priests are better in melee than the generals of some other factions. You know the drill. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne, and milk for my cornflakes. Disciples of Tzeentch. The followers and cultists of the chaos god Tzeentch, the god of change, deceit and dark magic. The cultists that follow this god have infiltrated the societies of the mortal realms. They gather ancient knowledge and conjure mighty spells. They follow an ever-changing web of fates that unravels and then entangles itself constantly. In the game, you are the magic-heavy army. Only Lumineth can top you with Teclis in their list. You gather points to summon more demons, cast mighty spells, and so on. You can be the middle ground between a horde and an elite army. Every unit you have can cast spells. You can literally be the Rave of Destruction, where your dubstep solos are accompanied by death lasers and greater demons. Hedonites of Slaanesh. The followers and demons of the chaos god of excess and pleasure. The Hedonites of Slaanesh have lost their god, as he was imprisoned by the elven gods in the Age of Myth, but his shackles have become weak due to the plots of an elven goddess called Morathi. A small fragment of Slaanesh has escaped, and now the Hedonites are fired up for some diabolical partying. On the table, the Hedonites are fast, really fast. When you wound and not kill an enemy, you get points to summon more units. You're the mobile BDSM sex dungeon that is running around and collecting poor souls to torture. You have some powerful abilities and great mechanics, also some very good spells. Maggotkin of Nurgle. The plague-ridden followers of the chaos god of pestilence and plague. Roaming the lands, they spread the gifts of the Plague Father and his blessings. Long have they forgotten the burden of sickness, as they are now unhindered by disease and pestilence, riding on rotflies or walking on their maggot-ridden legs, slaying the warriors of order and gifting the inhabitants the purest blessings of their chaos god. On the table, the Maggot King are one of the tankiest armies, but really elite. Your priests are great and your auras are not lackluster. An army for everyone who likes the aesthetic and wants to play a tanky army that slowly wears the enemy down. Skaven. The realms are seething with red men. They are the children of the Horned Red, and so they are crafty and deceitful. Every Skaven thinks he's the best and wants to get rid of his competitors, ever chewing on the roots of the mortal realms. They are ruled by the Council of 13, and then the Hidden Shadow Council, and their fiefdom are ever expanding. From their capital of Skavenblight, that is trapped in a separate demi-realm, they have built thousands of settlements in the name of the Great Horned Red. In the game, they are one of the hardiest horde armies to ever horde. You have good wizards and good priests. You want to bog down the enemy with clan rats and then get your heavy units in there for some heavy fighting. Slaves to Darkness. After the end times, Archeon, the nemesis of Sigmar, went off and started his own faction. His followers follow his lifestyle, but not giving in to any specific chaos god and thus earning rewards from all, as they vie for the souls of this mortal champion. Archeon is their role model, and so they all want to be like him, but this path is not any less dangerous than any other path that leads you to the Chaos Gods. When a champion fails, all powers that watch him see him fail and can thusly punish him. On the table, they are your typical melee army, but you have some incredible wizards and very good cavalry units. Also, Archeon is a beast and can win games completely on his own. The next Grand Alliance that we will discuss is the Grand Alliance of Death. First off, in the Grand Alliance of Death are the Flesh Eater Courts. The ghouls of the Flesh Eater Courts are cursed to see themselves as shining knights, fair maidens, and noble lords. In reality, they are twisted ghoul spawn that feast on broken bones and dead flesh. In the realm of death, they have built enormous banquet halls and fortresses. In their twisted minds, they see these places as monuments of order and elegance. Any sane soul who must gaze at these hideous monuments of insanity and foulness will instantly understand the extent to which the Flesh Eater Courts have been twisted. In the Age of Myth, the first Flesh Eater Courts were created, and since then they have corrupted the souls and bodies of many poor inhabitants of the mortal realms. Their ranks have swelled over the centuries, but the control that Nagash has over these monsters is sporadic at best. Nagash, the god of undeath, has at least some power over all factions in this Grand Alliance, as he is oftentimes even the creator of these factions. But his power over the Flesh Eater Courts waxes and wanes, as they are prone to have certain misunderstandings. On the table, you can play as a horde faction and have some really good spells. You like melee and regeneration. Also, the Ghoul King on Terrorgeist is an absolute chad. Next off are the Legions of Nagash. In the Age of Chaos, Nagash went off and made his own faction with blackjack and hookers. The legions of Nagash are a personal army, which the Lord of Undeath will gather if the need arises. All factions in the Grand Alliance of Death more or less fall into the legions of Nagash, as Nagash can call upon all inhabitants of Shyish to defend his realm. Nagash and his Mortarks are extremely powerful and can even show that on the table. You have very good spells and strong wizards that command hordes of the undead. You want to bulldoze the enemy as Nagash or one of his Mortarks slowly summons more minions. Then we have the Night Haunt. Souls that committed crimes in their lifetimes may find themselves bound to live out their punishment even in the realm of Shyish. Their body remade is a spectral shadow of their former self. With rage and bitterness, they strike out at the living. They are commanded by the Mortark of Grief, Lady Olinda, and are one of the most loyal factions to Nagash. They reclaimed large swaths of Shyish from the forces of Chaos and have been the tip of the spear when it comes to reclaiming territory for the Lord of Undeath. In-game, they're a fast horde-style army. Your entire army is flying and a true nightmare for an opponent who wants to break through your lines through rend damage. You can deploy with a sort of deep strike and have weak wizards with okay spells and good tar pits to annoy your enemies with. The last faction of this Grand Alliance are the Osiriak Bone Reapers. After Sigmar's influence in the mortal realms waned again, Nagash decided to resurrect one of his fallen champions, who was imprisoned by the God King. Katakros was reborn, and a legion of undead skeleton constructs made to be ruled by him. He is the sword of Nagash, and the Syriac Bone Reapers have laid waste to mighty strongholds and cities, killing the inhabitants and adding the bones of the slain to their army. Even the realm gates that go from Shyish into the 8 Points, the realm of Archeon and the Chaos Gods, were captured by the Bone Reapers, and so they are feared by all. On the table, they're an elite army with very good heroes, good damage, and even better defense, and a solid artillery, and a immunity to battle shock. You also play very different to most armies, so the Osiriac Bone Reapers are not the best army to start with if you're new. This is just a suggestion. If you really like the models, then go ahead, but be warned. Then the last Grand Alliance, the Grand Alliance of Destruction. The first in this Grand Alliance are the Gloom-Spite Gits, an army made up of thousands of mushroom-addicted goblins and trolls. They fanatically follow the Bad Moon and the Spider God. Both deities were created through Gorka Morka, and now insane goblin shamans want to determine the fate of the mortal realms by getting drunk on mushroom liquor and casting spells of doom and destruction. Hordes of complete batshit insane Gits follow 2 mad gods and destroy entire civilizations in the meanwhile. On the table, you play as a horde army, with unpredictable buffs, thousands of Gits on the board, and giant trolls and glass cannon cavalry. You have good spells and good wizards, while having limited teleportation and regeneration. Then we have the Ogre-Maw tribes. The nomadic hordes of the Ogre-Maw tribes have roamed the mortal realms since the Age of Myth. Their hunger is insatiable, and they thunder in enormous hordes across the mortal realms to hunt down entire civilizations. 2 factions make up the Ogre-Maw tribes, the mounted Beastclaw Raiders and the more numerous Gutbusters. Both follow their maw path and strip the land clean of anything edible. The Beastclaw Raiders ride on their mighty Thunder Tusks, Mournfangs and Stonehorns, and are constantly pursued by the Everwinter, a magical ice storm that freezes everything it touches, including the Beastclaw Raiders, and so they are constantly on the move. The Gutbusters live a more slowly lifestyle. They are not pursued by anything other than their own hunger. They traverse the lands in a semi-nomadic fashion. They settle down for a few decades and then move on when the lands and the resources of the region are completely depleted. But after a certain time, every Gutbuster Maw tribe will circle around and begin the long march back to the Maw Fort. The Maw Fort is the stronghold of the particular Maw tribe, and there they sire children and celebrate the ending of the current Maw path before wandering off once again. In the game, the Ogre Maw tribes also split into two playstyles. The Beastclaw Raiders have powerful charges and enormous movement. They thunder across the table and charge the enemy, very simple but extremely effective. The Gutbusters also run across the table and charge, but they also make heavy use of gut magic and their numbers. Both have up and downsides. Beastclaw Raiders are very fast and do tons of damage, but they are one of the most elite factions in the game. Gutbusters have very good infantry units, some good spells and generally more numerous than their mounted brethren, but they are also much slower, so you have to choose. Then we have the Uruk War Clans. The Uruk War Clans are also split into two factions. The heavily armored Ironjaws and the barbaric hordes of Bone Splitters. Both roam the realms and cause destruction wherever they go. But for the Uruks, war is not a means to an end. For them, it's life. An Uruk must fight, either against other Uruks or whoever is at hand. Uruks grow their entire lifetime, and adrenaline makes them grow faster and stronger, so the biggest Uruks have also seen the most fighting. They are the children of Gorka Morka, and they topple nations in his name. Think of them as the average football hooligan as an entire race. The Ironjaws have thick plate armors and deadly stabbers and axes. They fight in loose formations and are a bit more civilized than the Bone Splitters. The Bone Splitters are the complete batshit insane cousins of the Ironjaws. They believe that the soul of Gorka Morka is trapped in the bones of giant beasts that traverse the mortal realms, and to release him, they have to slay these monsters. While the Ironjaws are led by mega bosses and war chanters, the Bone Splitters are led by war dogs and wargog prophets. On the table, the Ironjaws are a scary melee powerhouse army that runs across the table to smash the enemy into pieces, while buffing itself or even teleporting to strategic positions. Yet, they run a bit elite. The Bone Splitters are very fast. Very, very fast. And they get bonuses for hunting monsters. So many damage spells that they make for an excellent charging horde army, but they are very bad in armor stats. You can combine both factions and get some cool buffs, but also lose many special effects that both factions normally have. Then the last faction I'm going to present here are the Sons of Behemoth. The Sons of Behemoth are a faction completely made up of Gargans, the Age of Sigmar variant of giants. In ages past, the primordial beast Behemoth sprung forth as the son of Ymir. He was the sire of the Gargans and a trusted general of Gorka Morka. In the Age of Chaos, Behemoth was slowly corrupted by chaos, and the God King struck him down in a titanic battle. Since then, the Gargans are without a god, and every Gargan is trying to become as strong as Behemoth and claim his empty position as god of the Gargans. Recently, enormous Gargans have emerged, and they all vie for power. Recruitable for all factions in their quest to get stronger and leading large groups of man-crusher Gargans, they roam the realms. On the table, they are the most elite factions in-game and play like a group of giants should. They smash everything to pieces and hurl huge stones at the enemy, but are very slow and clunky. And with that, we have completed our little excursion into the Age of Sigmar and its factions. Please keep in mind that new factions release every year, so this video might not include all current factions, but I hope it educates on the factions that were in the game as I made this video. In the near future, I will make some more videos about Age of Sigmar, where I will go more in depth. But for now, this is it, and if you want, you can check out my videos about D-Genesis Rebirth and Trudvang Chronicles. More videos are in the pipeline. And with that, I say farewell to you. And till next time, traveler, be safe.